Alright, well, now I'm back with another video update on the TEAC again. So this is going to involve trying to fix that noise issue in the left channel. So this is the board I had in the machine. I'm going to try to replace some of the small capacitors to see if I can't fix that noise issue in the left channel, as I said. So yeah, I've already gone through and replaced all the main electrolytic capacitors, so all the 10 microfarad electrolytic capacitors have been replaced, and all the 50 microfarad capacitors have been replaced with 47 microfarad caps already. So that in of itself is a big job. And then I noticed I had noise in the left channel, so I got a few smaller capacitors left to still replace, so I'm going to try doing that and see if I can resolve the issue. So we've got 3.3 microfarad capacitors, there's a couple of those. The stupid thing won't even focus. So there's one there. Another 3.3 one is here. Those are 25 volts. So I believe I got tantalum capacitors for those. And some of these other green ones, which might be, I don't know, polyester or something. Basically there's the one here in the corner and the one there, and then there's two on the underside that are a different value than the ones on top. And apart from that, I think the only other capacitors might just be these two 10 volt 10 microfarad ones here with the axial leads, but those might be kind of difficult to replace because the leads kind of go underneath here and it's difficult to tell where they actually go. Although I do have capacitors kind of similar to that, rated for 35 volts I believe, but I'm at least going to just try replacing these small ones and see if that fixes it, and then go from there. And I've already gone through and marked the pads of all these capacitors with red Sharpie just to make sure I don't heat the wrong pads and burn up some other component. So that's kind of a little precautionary trick I do myself. So we'll get on with it and see how it works and try to have our fingers crossed. So wish me luck. Okay, now I've got those 6 small capacitors replaced. Don't have a whole lot of light in here because it's kind of in the evening, so we've got the one green one right here is replaced. This thing's really not focusing all that well. Yeah, I've got that green one there. Then a 3.3 I replaced with a tantalum, which is that little yellow one there. Some of these resistors have yellow paint at the ends for some reason. The other tantalum is right there. That was the other 3.3 microfarad. And the other green one is right in there. I doubt you can even see it all that well, right there. And then the two on the bottom, 0.0015. So that's probably 1.5 nanofarad. And then I think these green ones were 10 nanofarad, something like that. And these tantalum ones were 3.3. So anyhow, I guess I've got all 6 of the old ones ripped out. A couple of them tested slightly bad, but I can't totally guarantee that these are the culprit of that problem until I test out the board in the deck. But I can slightly show you some of them that might have been bad. So I'll try to show these 3.3 ones. I think one of them tested a bit high, so I'll start with those. Probably just put this to the 20 microfarad, I think, scale. We'll get it clipped up. That's pretty cool light. That's the better of the two, 3.6667. The other one was almost not quite double. Well, I guess these are 3.3 anyway, so that one's probably good. And sometimes I don't always get the exact same readings on this, because this is the second 3.3 microfarad. It's kind of like 5.77, almost 5.8. When I first tested this one, it went up to like 5.82, but that's a tiny bit high, so I don't know if that would necessarily cause issues with the noise. Oh well, I think the lead broke off of one of these small ones, but a couple of them were hard to get a reading off of. I think the two 10 nanofarad ones might have been fine. That's a nanofarad scale, so that's just about perfect. 10.05 nanofarads. 10 nanofarads. Now this is the 1.5 nanofarad, which is 0.0015 microfarad. That's 1.43 nanofarad. That's the last one I'm able to test, 10.04 nanofarads. So that's not too bad either. So it's a little hard to say if these will in fact resolve that noise issue, so let's go find out. Well, so far that made no difference, unfortunately. Left channel, right channel. And again, it's the tape rather than the source, so it's in the playback part of something. So that's kind of erratic. Well, this is that spare board again, so it's not the one in the deck. But as of now, I suppose I've replaced every capacitor with the exception of those 10 microfarad ones surrounding the relay, which they're a bit different on this board, but they kind of go here and here. And also the only other one I think would just be this high voltage one, which could just be a filter cap, but I mean, if there's only one of those, I don't know if it would cause noise like that in just one channel. And then of course I still kind of hope it's not a transistor that's gone faulty, because these are more than likely germanium. I think I'm almost certain they are. And these are all Toshiba transistors. And this board's got 9 transistors on it, which is kind of a lot for a board this size. But I'd be a bit worried about trying to, you know, swap those out for the ones in here, what have you, because you know, germanium transistors are that much more sensitive to heat. And also there's other things about having matched pairs and all that stuff. So I really don't know too much about how that would go. I mean, these are all the same transistors as the other board, because as I said they're identical, but the caps are kind of different. So yeah, I don't know what else there really is to say about that. But these are all kind of different. 2SA49. SB486, and the ones with the heatsink are different than those. I found the part numbers for these in the PDF manual. so that was good. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if I want to swap out all 9 of those, because I don't really know if this board is totally perfect. Another interesting thing was the variable resistors or trimmers here. These are actually for the output level balance between the 2 channels, so that's one channel, that's the other channel. But I definitely knew I didn't want to be tampering around with those trim pots until well, based on the fact that there was noise as opposed to just an imbalance between the levels. But there are a couple capacitors that connect directly to the lugs, if you will, of these variable resistors, such as the one like here, which I think is a 10 microfarad cap, and also those 1.5 nanofarad ones I replaced connect directly to it, I think. So that was kind of interesting, but I'm sure there could be a faulty component anywhere in here that could create an issue like that. I'm not entirely sure how much voltage runs across all this this whole circuit with this board, because I think I saw somewhere or read somewhere that some of the wires going to the different heads and things like that that go to that socket connector which this plugs into, I think some of those wires might actually run on as high as 30 volts, but I'm not sure if that's entirely true. But yeah, that other board in the deck, which is the original one from there, had all these different electrolytic caps. I mean, they're all the similar values, but just different voltages and possibly different brand. So I think some of those might have been rated for fairly low voltages, like maybe 10 volts. I don't know if these are necessarily filter caps for this whole board per se, if they're rated for 50 volts and 250, but I did replace that one, the 100 microfarad. I didn't replace that one or these two 10 microfarad ones. So yeah, again, I'm sure if it is in fact a capacitor, or any other component for that matter, it could probably be anywhere in the whole circuit throughout the whole signal path. So that's kind of difficult to diagnose. But the odd thing was, when I even began researching this issue with noise in one of the channels, I think most of the forums and stuff, I found people that had noise in one of the channels on the source audio, which would be the record preamplifier, and I'm having it on the playback kind of output stage side of things, which was a bit different. I don't know exactly what else I was gonna say really, but it's still somewhat interesting to poke around in here, and it kind of seems like some of these transistors really could be PNP germanium transistors in here. The emitters of the transistors facing that way. And you've got different things for the anode and cathode of a capacitor, kind of with the polarity being reversed with the positive ground as a result of that. But this is pretty much the schematic for that playback preamp board. So, you know, this is the whole board itself. It identifies different parts as being the left channel and the right channel. I think that's actually the underside of the PCB. But off to the left you've got the 18 pins for that connector, and it identifies what these all connect to in another page on here. So it's probably further up right here. So that connector fits around there at the top of the board. You've got all these negative voltages, which probably indicate there's a positive ground as a result of having PNP transistors. Yeah, this is to indicate the pins of the big connector that goes on here and what they all connect to. So I'm not sure exactly how much I can really tell from this schematic as far as diagnosing that noise issue of the left channel. Yeah, I don't know if we can necessarily find these 10 microfarad capacitors in the schematic that surround the relay, which I haven't yet replaced, or even that high voltage one here, because on that board in my deck, I mean these were just rounded axial lead capacitors, and these are kind of just box things. But the ones on the board in my deck were higher voltage. I think they were 25 volts, and this one here says 10 volts. And then of course, to complicate things even further, a bunch of these capacitors just have the reference number, if you will, but not the actual value. Well, continuing on, I'm looking at the rest of the schematic as far as the record preamp board, just on a change of subject. So there's different things you see here. These are the record selector switches, the micro switches, and I think these two capacitors here are the ones I replaced, which I said were on the underside of the board in mine. Then you can see some of the relays laid out here with all these little switch parts. So can kind of analyze some of those capacitors. So these two here are 0.005 microfarads, which is I suppose that's 5 nanofarads. Let's see, that's 123, 127. But I'm pretty sure those are those small green capacitors, which there should be 4 of those in the deck. This is still somewhat hard to follow in the schematic here. But I don't know, I found at least 3 of those 5 nanofarad capacitors, so of course there's the 2 there. There's a third one up here that's 126, and that kind of connects to part of the bias adjust. You know, variable resistor 8 is for part of the bias adjust. So at least for the relays, these two here seem to interact with that. So 123 and 127. Now luckily the diagram here of this whole record preamp board has the capacitor reference numbers printed on here. I'm not always as savvy with some of the stuff as I'd like to be, and I forget things easily sometimes, especially the real detailed things with parts of electronics or whatever. But it's already difficult enough to follow everything throughout here and to kind of piece it all together between the PCB diagrams and the actual schematics. So it's a lot of work to even comprehend. But I suppose at this point I might just continue replacing a few capacitors here and there and see if anything gets resolved. So I don't necessarily want to tamper with the transistors, especially for that noise problem, unless I've completely determined that it must be something to do with transistors. And even out of all 9 transistors on that playback amplifier board, I don't really know how well I could narrow it down. Another thing I was thinking about was kind of just these TEAC machines versus Akai's. A lot of transistors in the older Akai machines, especially from the 60s, were made by Hitachi and were rather notorious for having faults and becoming unstable, I guess. And the transistors in this thing were made by Toshiba. That doesn't necessarily make them any more or less available for replacements. So yeah, hopefully it can be a capacitor that's a simple fix as opposed to a transistor, but I suppose it could be either or for that noise issue. Because transistors do a lot of strange things even under different temperatures and operating conditions, so that all kind of sucks sometimes. But we'll see how far we can get with doing a bit more research and trial and error, so stay tuned and goodbye for now.